Hey everybody, it's good to see you here on the CU live stream.
You found a new way to work it in.
Yeah, let's just get it out of the way now.
And it's robust, don't forget that.
Yeah.
That's your thing.
Do you remember, like, the very, very, very first webcam chat app was this thing called CU See Me?
Yeah, that was
like
a while ago.
Only people in colleges had it. Like, you know, in the computer lab, not even in your dorm room.
They love your hat.
My hat is fabulous. I got this hat at Target. It's probably the best $9 I have ever spent at Target.
It's a value.
Yeah, like the 90s are back in a horrible way. Like there's just have some 90s.
Was there an entire rack of these hats?
Yeah, you like you can't like. I was in the women's section because with my wife, and it was just like there are no clothing options that are not either grunge or fly girl. Like, yeah, so everything is retro.
Cyclical trends.
So how's your week been? Ben?
Well, it's been not very eventful. We've been doing a lot of design work since we don't have our new tools ready yet, but that gives us a lot of opportunities to go back through old stuff and polish it back up and just put together some things so that when we're all ready with our new tools, we can start putting it in the game.
Good. So I've had a week that's maybe pushing like 50% lead HR and HR type things, and
And the rest is bouncy castles?
Yeah, bunch of job interviews, and rest is bouncy castles. So let's just go straight into the top 10 list. Number one thing on the list is building rubble chunks. On, I think, Wednesday, I did this live stream that just ended horribly with just building spewing fountains of rubble, like, infinitely, and, I was wearing a wizard hat, so it kind of felt very Sorcerer's Apprentice, but yeah, just all the, and then Thursday I nailed it down to where, okay, this is plausible, but it's a little bit boring. It's like so plausible, it's just like, well, chunk. And so, just now I posted a really fun gif of one of the really big Arthurian healer hall things. It was made by Bosk in the Builders Brigade, and I've destroyed your work, Bosk. I am having such fun tearing it apart. And also, like, I'm sorry I missed this bug, and I'm gonna have to go back and like recreate this bug and turn it back on. Like, the first time the entire building loaded in as one rubble chunk and just started bouncing around, like it was literally a bouncy castle. You just, you could knock around the entire building. So I got to have fun, like, building shims and ramps to make the building itself fall down. Like, so yeah, CU. The only game with a literal bouncy castle right now, anyway. I kind of want to find some way to work that in.
Well, I said you just need to make rubber a building material.
Yeah, it's one number. I could turn up the restitution force. That, like, all of this stuff is, it's physically simulatable. Right? Started with NVIDIA PhysX. We've taken certain liberties, but it's still the core of, their physics system. So, yeah, that's there. Just go check out the forum post, and there'll probably be some GIFs in the weekly update email, too. So... We also just kind of had some discussions. Ben came up and was like, so what happens to that rubble chunk once it's on the ground and it's squished people? Like, can you dismantle it? And I said, well, Ben, I don't know. What do you think should happen?
It sounds like no one has designed this far yet, so we'll have to figure out exactly how we can either turn those into some gathering nodes.
Yeah, it's definitely a gathering. It's definitely... At a minimum, you can just harvest it down, but...
Well, I think we still need to be able to destroy them, like damage rubble chunks, so that we can, like... The wall fell down, but it's still blocking the gap in the wall, so we can't get into the castle. If it's just indestructible, then you still have an indestructible walls.
I mean, there's no reason that you couldn't even just, like, start building onto the rubble chunk like it was a building
Yeah,
plot
like I said,
that was
that would
like
be cool
knocked
if
over
we
on
just
its
like
side.
after things have come to rest, just like grid morph everything, and then you could just start building right onto it.
Yeah, I mean that is exactly what it is right now. So there's no reason you couldn't, but should you?
Exactly.
I'm looking at you, Mr. Systems Designer.
I think it would be fun, but we got to figure out what our interface actually looks like. I don't know if Matt has all the details for how grid morphs are implemented in the first place.
That's probably going to be more me than Matt, I think. So,
Okay.
but things move forward.
Yes.
So yeah, tech number 2, and this is really as much you as tech. So
yeah, I don't know if this is a tech or a design at this point, but it's about weapon swapping. So right now, if you want to switch your weapons in the game, you have to open up your inventory and drag things onto your paper doll, and then close your inventory, and then you have a new weapon in your hand, which is a lot more cumbersome than we really want it to be for a lot of things, like switching between your bow and arrow and your sword and shield. So we're putting in something for quick weapon swap, which is titled Readied Weapons, of just which weapons are readied and which weapons are equipped but not yet readied, so you can swap between which weapons are ready and which ones are just equipped to your character at a given time. So that's a whole feature of putting a bunch of things together, but the short description of it is just you can have a bunch of different things and you can push a button to swap between them without opening up your inventory.
now, does this also intersect with travel stance, where travel stance is just kind of, this set of readied weapons that's no weapons?
I don't think so. I think travel stance is just a separate toggle that is, whatever is in your hands, make it go away so that it just looks like you're a guy running around, and then you get out whatever weapons are supposed to be readied when you're back in combat again. So I don't think that's like a third state, because then we get into a state of like, okay, well, when we go out of travel stance, we have to remember which previous state we were in. So I think we'll just maintain that state and say, you're in your two-handed state and you're in travel stance. So your travel stance puts your weapon away, and then when you go out of travel stance, well, you're still in your two-handed state, so that state just persists.
Okay, interesting. There might be some places where we can combine bits of the code, maybe.
Sure.
Yeah, but that I trust Christina to do the right thing with that. I'm gonna make you do number 3 too.
See, I sat down here like a minute before the stream started, so I haven't even read all of these.
Yeah, everyone's like, no, we can't have 2 engineers. We need programmers and design.
Let's see.
So
Art/tech, crafting, UX, and styling.
we applied a grid morph to Tim, and it became big.
Is that what happens? With much of the art complete, AJ and James are now turning all of that great art and styling into real working UI. All the cool functionality and visuals of this new UI will greatly improve the player experience.
Have we previewed the design of the UI, or is it going to be? Are people going to see it for the first time when it's working in the game?
I'm not sure. I think we've put up some of the concepts of it, but not like the version that we took from concept to implementation. I don't know what the last state that anybody's actually seen external of this, but yeah, it's a new UI for crafting, and it looks way better, and it's much more convenient and usable than the previous version where you had to lock what state you were in and then put in specific things, and if you put them in the wrong order it didn't work, and like it's much more streamlined than that, and it has some nice art to it. So once that's in, it'll be a lot more fun to craft things, I think.
So number 4, it's kind of a combo roll-up of swapping out our UI toolkit, Ceph to coherent, and then switching the client to 64-bit, and that's kind of those are both sort of interlinked together. They're going to end up going live at the same time, I think, but yeah, they're both working. JB's been doing some work on just making little tweaks in how the UI and the client talk to each other. The core infrastructure around coherent is largely done except for the bug fixes, and Matt's been working on that, and George flipped the projects over to 64-bit. So
Nice.
we're gonna be testing all of that pretty soon. It's a question of I expect we will overlap 32 and 64-bit clients both for a short time, but I'm looking at like the Steam hardware survey, and less than 2% of people are less than 2% of people are running on 32-bit systems. So we're not going to hold that on for very, very long. I think almost everybody, like, you know, it's just even an even smaller percentage can't. It's just for whatever reason they have a 32-bit copy of Windows installed, and
Right.
you know, Windows 10. You may not like it, but you're gonna get it.
Well, how far back did 64-bit go? Right, there was Windows 8, 64.
Windows XP came out as 64-bit, but it was horribly broken. It was not a good idea to use. So, you know,
So you can
Windows.
go back pretty far, even if you don't have Windows 10, you can go on 64.
Yeah, Windows, like anything that runs the game has a 64-bit version of Windows. So, you know, at this point we're following the continuum of basically there's no OS that Microsoft supports that's not 64-bit, so just let it go. Let it go. Anything that has DirectX 11
Right.
has 64-bit. So, you know, you should, if you're on an old copy of Windows Vista 32-bit, perhaps it's time to just bow to the inevitable and put on Windows 10, and when you do, put on Windows 10 64-bit.
Sounds like good advice.
So, forewarned. And once we do that, you know, there's just a couple of knobs that we can turn up on. Keep more terrain detail loaded at once. Keep more texture detail loaded
Higher
at once.
texture
And
resolution will be.
that'll be nice for
Really nice.
everybody. Everyone's going to enjoy seeing that.
Yeah. Okay.
Number 5.
Number 5, design/art, work in progress, simplified health bar prototypes. Okay, so what did Tyler say here? Based off some great discussion in our forums, we've prototyped a different unit frame with just one health bar instead of 6. Players will still be able to target different body parts, but will draw from just one health pool. Check the thread on the forums if you want more info.
Yeah. So, I mean, I think you can describe this better than Tyler described. You can describe this to like this started with you telling Tyler.
Yeah, this is
an
an unfortunate workflow that we've got going in order to get us to this point. But basically,
no one thinks having 6 health bars on your screen for every character is a great experience.
yeah.
I think. So we're looking at ways to streamline that, and you know, there's lots of things of like, you know, well, getting the torso health bar down to 0 kills somebody, but getting the legs health bar down to 0 just, you know, just locks him in place. Why would I ever not target the torso? And there are a lot of design questions like that.
Yeah, the way that it's currently structured now, you have a different health pool for each body part, and what we're converting it to is so that you only have a single health pool for your overall character, but there's still the possibility that you can have specific attacks that target specific body parts, and then check only against that armor slot. So if you target somebody's legs, like their helmet doesn't factor in, but if you don't do any specific body part targeting, then all of their armor factors in and checks against an average of that. So it has some gameplay ramifications, but the main one is that we're able to clean up some of the UI, and then we have a lot less information clutter on the HUD, which is
so targeting body parts is still there. Resistances for individual body parts is still there, but the UI is a lot less cluttered. And have we talked about wounds? I mean, you know, I know the discussion here. I've not been keeping up with that particular forum thread. This was something that started as a forum, like, you know, is
well, it started as
suggestion conversation in the office, and we pretty quick turned it into MJ making a forum post on it.
Yeah, like I actually made and wrote up that forum post. But it did start with a conversation. But it's been, you know, sort of a on and off long running conversation since we started concepting the game. A long time ago when we first started, it was a single health bar, and then we were like, well, we want to do cooler things with our health system and our damage system, and it sort of evolved into, well, how are we going to deal with having health as like representative of the entire character? So we started modeling health and damage to body parts, and you know, having wounds and trauma and some other things. We've sort of put them all in together and said, well, which of these are going to stick and which of them are not, and how is it all going to work out? And this is just a refinement of that, and we got to a point where we said, okay, well, we're going to be doing a whole bunch of new ability work anyway. We're doing a new editor. We're going to add some new classes. What do we want to change at this point for our health system that will go along with that? And this is, you know, one of the major things that has been a difficulty the whole way through ever since we started tracking these different healths is how do you display it in a way that isn't cluttered? And it's just so much information that it's hard to do that. And we've gone through a couple of different iterations of our display. We had at one point a like paper doll character, and you could see like the layout of their arms and legs, and then we went to just
it looks very
bars.
sci-fi,
Yeah,
not in a good
like,
way.
And it's just hard.
It looks like VATS in your UI.
It's just a hard way to. It's a hard amount of information to display. And so this is an attempt to simplify that somewhat, not to take out all of the functionality, because it's still interesting to have like specific body part targets, I think. And like as you're talking about with wounds, like that system doesn't really change. Right now, the way that wounds work is that each body part can separately be wounded, and in this case, we're just taking out the health bars for each body part, which means that your character's single overall health bar will still sustain wounds just like it did previously. So you won't have the difference between like taking damage to your legs causes a wound, and taking damage to your torso also causes a wound. It'll just be like taking damage to your character causes a wound. So that's another system that we're gonna look at as we continue along. Of like, do we want to change the way that works? I think the current concept has more wounds because the health bar overall got bigger, because it's taking the overall health of the character and only distributing it to one health bar instead of distributing it to 6. So the single bar is longer, and so it has more wounds thresholds in it. But that's just something that we'll continue to look at and iterate over time.
Yeah, so you got rid of the second programmer, and you got a more technical discussion than like any of the programmers probably would have given you. But yeah, I think it's definitely going to be, it's going to streamline the game. It's one of those less is more kinds of things.
Yeah, well, it's trade-offs. I mean, we're losing some functionality because we can't do stuff like dealing damage separately to different body parts and caring about those and healing them separately and stuff that would make a more advanced game. But at the same time, the simplification makes the display a lot easier, and it still gives us a bit of flexibility, like I said, because we're doing keeping the ability to target specific body parts and still have different damages. So the way that players will care about their armor is still very, very similar. It just simplifies the display, and then somewhat reduces the amount of overhead for things like damage and healing to what part of what character.
Yeah. So number 6. Number 6. Doing Mike Crossmeyer, effect artist extraordinaire from Dark Age of Camelot, and continuing here at City State, has been going through all the weapons and doing work on what more do we want to do with effects on weapons, what are the techniques for that, and we're sort of putting together a little bit, like, we have a really robust particle system of like, everything that runs now is just particles, but we want a little bit of higher level things, like kind of a timeline of, okay, first this thing appears above your head, and then this trail attaches for this parts of your sword swing, and those kinds of a higher level concept than particles, and just as sort of like a sequencer of VFX, and that's part of that.
Yeah, there's a bunch of stuff in there. There's things like, animating textures across meshes as opposed to just displaying camera-facing particles.
Yeah, doing more than particles is the core thing.
But specifically this weapon thing is like, if I have a sword, how long is my sword versus another sword that's a different length? And right now it's just, we're playing particles offset from the hand. And so it doesn't account for things like, this sword blade is curved, and so we got to work out some of those things of like actually giving weapons bones in some positions so we can play things on them.
I want to come back to that because the particle system on this is, in some crazy way, it's sort of the Troika Games particle system from the Temple of Elemental Evil game that we had done there. So I'll give credit to Sean Craig, who later ended up as a lead engineer on WildStar, for the design of our particle system. It's really awesome, but there's lots of like bells and whistles of make this conform to someone's body and all that we just it's still basically the particles, the code that I wrote like in 2013 overnight in the live stream, and so kind of turning that into the real deal. Number 7. This is all you.
Oh, good. More design things that I don't know what it says yet. Design work in progress, Devout and support class designs. So I'm working on those. We're still quite a ways away from actually implementing our Devout classes in support, which is like Bard and...
Let's catch up. What is a Devout class, Ben?
So a Devout class is a sort of healer mage hybrid. So these are characters that will have some utility healing and some damage, and be able to switch between them and have one complement the other in some way. So this is like the Hellbound, who has like life magic and death magic and has to do some of one to do some of the other, and so there's sort of a balance back and forth that you have to maintain. And all of them sort of work that way in a little bit different ways, but like I said, those are a little bit farther off than mages, which are in design a little bit further along, and also just on the to-do list a little bit closer. But since we don't have the tools to actually implement a lot of that stuff yet, which is something that programmers are currently working on, I'm going ahead and doing some more design for in the future, so that we can have some more bases for programmers to look at for reference of, hey, our system should really be able to do this or that, and also just so that we have it laying around so that when we get our tools in, we can just go right back to the design and be like, well, here's our list of things, let's start working on those.
Okay. So number 8, speaking of particles. Particles, I've said, are super robust, and there's like 40, 50 parameters possible on every particle. And I've mentioned a bunch of times when people have asked us questions about, hey, I'm putting a new rig together, and I've said it's super important if you have a ton of cores to also have really good memory, like fast memory bandwidth. Otherwise, your code, like the core is just sitting there waiting on data to get in and out of memory for it to process it. You're not getting the full benefit of that. And I said, like, these like high-end Ryzen Threadripper 816 whatever cores, like the bottleneck on the frame rate of the game is actually the memory bandwidth, not the CPU performance.
Is that the memory bandwidth on the motherboard, or is that
Yeah.
the actual speed of the memory?
The speed of the memory and just the connection to the CPU. And one of the big reasons for that is actually the particles, because when every particle has like 50 parameters on it, you got to suck in the particle, update those parameters, and send them back out. But even though all of these parameters are used by some particles, most particles do not use most of the parameters. Things like how does this raindrop bounce does not apply to how a cloud of smoke poofs up, for instance. And so there's kind of this, restructuring it so that that's sort of a dynamic index, and any individual particle only carries around the parameters that it updates and that it uses, and that'll let us get a lot more performance. So we're looking at like maybe cutting down the number of bytes per particle by a factor of like 60% more. And when the bottleneck on updating all the particles is just getting the memory in and out of the CPU, that translates straight into like a 60% reduction in the in the time it takes to update all the particles in a scene. So that's super important. So just better data structures, and this is something that I sketched, I wrote like the outline of this on one of the flights between here and Seattle, and then it's just like, when am I going to get time to do that? So Wiley, one of the newer programmers, is taking that and dragging it home. So I'm optimistic.
Cool.
Looking forward to that.
This one I know relatively little about. It's quite a bit on the tech side, I think.
I mean, it's like tech artist,
Yeah.
of rigging and stuff. There's no actual code involved in this.
There's no code involved?
There's no code involved in this at all. It's like the technical side of art.
All right. Well,
I just did one. You got to do this
I'll
one.
try to do this one. So for Characters 2.0 work in progress, UV, Geo, and production improvements. So this has an A and a B. Does it have more? It does. It has an A, a B, and a C. So updated armor. John completed Arthurian heavy retrofit, including updated materials. He's begun working on TDD light armor. Once these are complete, and the necessary tech is done, which sounds like code to me, we can get them in the game. B of this is artist-created character LODs. So this is just getting out of our procedural LODs and having artists actually create them. Joe quickly weighted the test asset we created last week to make sure our non-procedural version not only worked but wouldn't take much time to do. The next step is the required tech as well as the rest of the models. Once complete, goal is improvement, performance, and better looking models at a distance. So that sounds like there's a required tech in there too, but I'm not really sure what that is. And then part C of this,
little teeny bit,
teeny tech. MF human UV edits. John spotted and fixed an issue with our layouts that would have caused more work down the line with more races. He made sure both male and female UVs match up better so that we don't have to make different textures for the same equipment pieces, which sounds like a good bug to fix.
Yeah, that's the kind of, I mean, sort of the way it works is we start with just like a texture of a naked person, and we, decal onto that texture. You're like, all right, here we're just gonna overwrite that hairy skin texture with a gauntlet texture, and so it's like stickers. It really is like, take the person, peel them like an orange and flatten them out. And that's how texture mapping works.
Like,
and then just like we have stickers that we put on it, but you have to make sure that every character, when you like peel them and flatten them out, every character's parts are in the same place, so you can put the stickers in the same place.
Yeah. Like if it was just stickers, it would just be like straight up decaling, and then you could put the stickers wherever you wanted. But we have to cut them up into very specific sections, and that's kind of where this is a problem, right?
Yeah. So. That's what John's been doing.
Yeah.
So, art, animation stuff. There's my turn to read a thing.
All right.
These people are like, everyone's excited about when is rubble gonna go in? When do we have big chunks of rock falling on people's heads? But no one is more excited for that than the animators, because they really, really want me to go fix a bunch of animation bugs for them. I want to drop rocks on people's heads first, though. So, in the meantime, they are working on... Scott's been working on mage casting animations to add a little bit of polish, a little bit of flash, a little bit of...
Well, a little bit of creating them in the first place, right? Because we haven't had mages in the game yet.
I mean, we have, but
we had some prototypes earlier on in alpha, but we haven't had our actual like flame warden and all these classes actually.
Yeah, and the mages did not use focuses or wands or staffs or any of those things that you kind of want your mages to do. So we're gonna have the animations ahead of time once Ben gets the tools to script up the actual abilities. Those will be ready to go. Sendra's been working on the new versions of short and longbow animations that have like variable timing bits in them, and it's all gonna come together as soon as I get to stop working on rubble. I could drop rocks on people's heads forever. This is my new favorite thing.
That's good. I'm pretty sure it will be a lot of people's favorite thing once it's in.
You want me to take the last two, because these are like super graphics?
Yeah, I think you know a lot more about these than I do.
Okay, so Dave's got 2 for 1 this week. Number one thing is disc lights, where lights are not just a single point, which gives really, really harsh things, but just doing the math in all our pixel shaders to give the lights actual volume, and so it's not just like here's my light, and right now one side of your nose is completely lit and the other side of your nose is completely in shadow. Now oh wait, the other side of your nose is totally bright and the other side is completely dark, and just giving lights actual volume to soften things up, make it not look so harsh. And that's little detail-y stuff. Also he took a big pass through clouds, and like we have a really good sky system in this game. We truly do. and it's just mostly about finding the right knobs, like right settings for the knobs, soften up the shader on the clouds, give them, good definition, but not harsh edges, and the core is there, and this is lots of knobbing.
Yeah, I'll be really interested to hear about that. There's a lot of cool things we want to do with our skies and things.
Also, giving lights some volume. Like we finally get the look that we want of like the moon setting on water, where it looks like a moon setting over water, not just like some harsh streak of light, but what it should look like. So lots of good stuff there. Last bit is wrapping up. We did a conversion of all the textures in the game to a new format that takes a little more memory but greatly increases the quality, and there was a bug in that where the alpha channels got a little bit messed up, and suddenly all the trees had no leaves, and took another pass through that, and now it is looking good. Trees have leaves again. And also just all the textures are higher quality, although, at the expense of some memory usage, which, going back to number 4, 64-bit, yay.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, because we shouldn't be too actually bottlenecked on our memory usage, because systems have a lot of memory once we have the 64-bit addressing.
Yeah, so that'll be done soon.
Yeah.
So, yeah,
it's a lot of stuff.
That's a lot of stuff.
It's only 12 things, but a lot of subparts.
I am hoping to actually get just some bit of falling debris and damage onto hatchery before the end of the day.
Oh.
That may go horribly. it may crash people, but so I'll be on standby to roll it back over the weekend. In fact, I will pledge right now to come out of this and just do another live coding stream of trying to finish that.
Nice.
So yeah, that's where we are.
Yeah.
So I think we can open it up to questions. We have one design, one engineer.
No art.
Yeah, no art. A completely artless Q&A.
All right.
We'll also take questions about metal.
Q&A.
Ben and I are two of the prime metalheads in the office.
Odelvik asks, can we have Krull-style rubble that flies upwards when the island stabilizer structure is destroyed?
What style?
Krull-style rubble. You remember that? That was like a kids movie around the era of like the Dark Crystal and Time Bandits and all. And I'm not remembering this scene.
No, I don't either.
But
I do remember the title of that though.
Yeah, Krull was like a blade, right? Yeah, so I do not remember this scene in the movie. I remember that the movie existed.
That's
but
about my memory
I have a
too.
better answer to that. Yes, we definitely want rubble to be affected by wind and physics and everything like that. So someone casts a wind spell, it'll move stuff. You've seen that in
I want to see
earlier
the
versions
Three
of the
Little
games.
Pigs simulator.
Yeah. Go back and look at, go to the Halloween, October 31st, Wednesday live coding stream and just, watch the last 2 minutes with when I completely borked the physics. And it was, I want to, it was hilarious and it was awesome. And that's the kind of emergent stuff that needs to happen.
Sounds like a good
So.
time.
Paston asks, I asked Max this a while back about the Veil. How will the physics and time, speed up or slow down, work in it, both from a lore and game perspective? Will it be a one-on-one copy of the original world? Could it vary based on the intensity and location of where one might enter the Veil? And will the Veil version look completely different from the era you entered in, like a raw, untouched version of the world?
We haven't gotten into the actual visual differences of that yet, largely because we're not working on the classes that need the Veil to work. But we have some ideas for how we want to try to make it different. It's basically a copy of the world. I mean, it's basically just phasing you and giving you a different overlay of your screen. But we also want to make sure that we can do some cool things like putting additional stuff there that you can't see otherwise.
Yeah, the proxy will tell you about a different subset of entities.
Yeah.
Like, here's all the entities that you hear about when you're in normal world. Here's all the entities that you hear about when you're in the Veil world. And so there will be some things that you just your client won't even know about them unless you're in the Veil.
Yeah.
Or vice versa.
Scorpos asks, is there a plan to remove some of the info, specifically enemy location, from the compass ring anytime soon?
I don't know about anytime soon, but definitely a lot of stuff that we expose right now is there for the purpose of testing.
It's definitely part of the plan to remove that eventually.
Yeah, there's a whole system around player knowledge and vision that we haven't gotten to implementing yet. That's supposed to do things like not even tell your client about people who are hidden behind walls and things like that, so you won't be able to just mash tab and get targets that you can't even see. But that's a little bit down the road, and it's because there's a technical concern, and we can't just flip a switch and turn it off yet.
Brand asks, Ben, Mark told me to ask you, will all classes have access to the entire list of spell damage types, or will those damage types be restricted to certain classes?
Oh, yeah, they're definitely restricted to certain classes. There's a whole...
When you say damage types, we're talking about void, fire, etc.
Yeah, so, like, not every class will have a fire skill. We have a pretty long list of these types, and so part of the interesting part of the counterplay and the rock, paper, scissors of different classes and advantages and disadvantages is that certain damage types and certain defenses against certain damage types will be things that are limited to specific classes. So if one class is really good at doing fire and another class is really bad at defending against fire, well, that will be an advantage. And you can do some things about that in terms of your own like itemization and how you spec your build. And if you decide that you want to, learn your fire defense skills, or you decide you're going to neglect those because you don't worry about fire too much, or because you just rely on somebody to heal you if you're taking a bunch of fire damage, like there's a lot of flexibility there, but it's not unlimited. So it's not like every class can get really good fire defense. You can wear the best fire resistance gear you can, but you won't necessarily have a like this spell negates fire, like the Wave Weaver has a specific anti-fire skill with water putting out fire. Not everybody gets that, so there's not a lot of perfect counters where everybody can do everything. It's supposed to be about having some identity and having some advantages, so you have to pick what you want to play as your class, you have to pick how you want to equip yourself, you have to pick what skills that you want to focus on and advance. So there's a lot of choices there, but it's not going to give you the ability for everybody to do everything, because there are some clear lines and delineations of what advantages people can have against different classes.
Are there any damage types that are locked to only one class?
I don't think so. I think all of the damage types cross at least two.
What about one realm?
I don't think so. I think every realm at least has one case where they can do things, but it might be like super, super narrow, where something like, I think maybe the Black Knight is the only one in the Arthurian realm who gets void damage, and he doesn't get very much of it. But the Druid, like, half his skills are void damage, and there's a couple other ones that use it a little bit too. So there are some that are rare and some that are common. So like fire damage is pretty common. A lot of people get fire damage.
So what you're saying is that you can always put together an 8-man that's going to be able to do every type, but no one's going to be able to do them all.
Yeah, there's no single class that would be able to do all of them, because that would be a lot.
Well, that's a reason to make good groups, then, isn't it?
I'm not even gonna say that like you could put together 8 characters that can do all of them. But certainly, if you have access to all of the classes on your realm, you can do all of them.
All right. Taveramod wants to check on whether you have any ideas about how stealth and veil classes will work.
Well, there's a lot of ideas of how they will work.
Firmish ideas.
firmish ideas. Well, other than like using the veil, like basically having this alternate dimension that they walk in and out of, you could go back and watch the original BSC like stealth reveal. And there's some info in there. A lot of that is kind of dated, but we haven't really revisited those classes heavily since then. Like I said, I'm just now getting around to like revisiting the Devout classes, which haven't really been worked on since that original BSC reveal. So once we get around to working on the stealth classes, we'll go back through that information, review it through the lens of now having a more advanced skill system and a lot more clear idea of what our skill system is really capable of. And so there will be some revisions to what's in there. So I wouldn't say that stuff is like final by any means, because it's part of a BSC presentation of like, here's a bunch of crazy ideas, and we'll see how much of that makes it into the actual game. But yeah, like I said, the stealth classes are not ones we're working on actively right now, and haven't since then. So there's not a lot more information that I can really give you at this point. But once we get to working on them, we'll talk about those guys more, and along with these other classes that we haven't even really talked about what we're doing with mages in any great detail yet, because we want to get a little bit further into our implementation first. So nothing new right now, but when we get there, we'll talk about them more.
Caladix asks, when do you think we can expect the single health bar to be implemented in game?
I don't know. That's programming question. Do we know what the schedule looks like? That's a producer question, actually.
Yeah, I think right now it's the main. I think it's just about the next thing in the cube. After AJ's working on crafting UI, and JB's been working on the coherent migration, and I expect for both of them that's going to be once that wraps, that'll happen next on the UI side. I expect Christine is going to be ready before is going to be done before they get to that. I would bet money.
What's Christina doing on?
She's oh wait, no, Christina was doing readied weapons.
Yeah, I think Rob said he would be the person who needs to do that, but it's really a simple conversion for just like display purposes.
Take everything, route it to this one pool. We're not actually getting rid of the other pools. We're just saying everything goes to this pool.
Yeah, we're just kind of
it's a small
shortcutting
tech
it for
change.
right now.
Sorry.
And
sorry,
that'll
Christina.
make it play right.
Christina's on readied weapons.
Right. Yeah. So, but the tech part of that for right now should be fairly simple. Then we can go back and clean up the back end later. But it shouldn't matter, like for players and then for playtesting it, you won't even notice. Like you'll still have the other health pools. They just won't affect anything or do anything when we have the single health bar implemented in the first place. But then later we'll go back through and actually clean it up and make it so that you only really have that health bar. It's not just hiding the other ones. But I'm not sure exactly when all that will happen, but it's hopefully not too much longer. It sort of depends on how long it takes to find all the bugs in Coherent and get to 64-bit. So once all those bugs are found, and however many bugs there are, we don't know.
And by the way, experience working with the Coherent guys has been really great. So I want to thank them if any of them are watching. Just their responsiveness of I think we are pushing their code a lot harder than a lot of other games have, because a lot of games are just all right, I'm a shooter and I'm using Coherent to draw my HUD, and we have like this really really rich stuff that's like more complicated than things that are as complicated as stuff like Gmail, in terms of what we're doing in a web page.
It's a lot more interaction than it is just
display. And so we've been finding a bunch of their bugs, and they've been super, just because no one else has stretched it that far, and they've been super awesome about, hey, awesome, you're helping us make this better. Here's a new build. So,
cool.
Thanks to them.
Lodoween asks, after a piece of rubble crushes a player, will it fall further after they respawn?
Yes.
Yes?
Yeah, after it's... Well, okay, so right now, corpses, once a corpse comes to complete rest, it has no collision, actually.
Right.
So it really is kind of a, crush bin, and then bin, like ceases to matter for collision, because otherwise there's just too many weird things that happen when, you know, a corpse is a collider. Like, you know, you suicide, like a bunch of people suicide in a door or something. Like, so yeah, that's one where comes in, does enough damage to Ben that Ben dies, and then it just falls all the way through Ben, and you know there's a corpse there. But corpses, things that are fully corpsed, don't have collision at all, and trust me, that's better.
Yeah.
We don't do like soft body physics. We do what's called rigid body dynamics, where you know everything has its shape, and you know the shapes don't interpenetrate each other, and they don't change anything else's shape. It's just the shape, you know, is completely rigid. Yeah, you're a capsule. The building is a set of convex polyhedra.
Odilvic passes along a question from Medic. Medic asks, what are the big features you hope to get into testing during the second 90 days of Beta 1, other than things that have been worked on during the first 90 days, such as Coherent, the 64-bit client, and Rubble?
The building out a bigger game loop, you know, of just, you know, like a lot of the things like, oh yeah, here's just, you know, you spawn in and right here there's a whole bunch of gathering tents. And, you know, you just grab all the resources you want, and like making it into a big, like, you know, a real game world. That's probably the biggest thing for me.
Yeah, I would say the two things are building out classes, getting mages in, getting a whole bunch more stuff for the existing classes that we already have, getting our new ability editor working to a point where we can rapidly iterate on things and implement things, and then building out the world. And that's sort of what you said, but like having the improvements that we need to the editor for the world so that we can build out play spaces faster, be able to have our things like seamless zone transitions and all that sort of thing working, and maybe have some higher visual fidelity for things like, you know, distant terrain LEDs and you know, maybe some kind of like brush system and erosion and things like that, so that the world ends up looking better, and we can create more space faster, so that we can actually get first of all more scenarios put in, so that we can run, you know, building destruction test on our new building destruction map and things like that. But yeah, also get some more islands.
The separate building server is a big part of that too, to get all the building calculations outside of the game loop, so that, you know, reevaluating the forces on a building when something changes doesn't cause ability lag. Like, right. That's
so it's on the physics server.
So just pushing that harder. Another thing that would be really awesome, I can't say if it'll definitely get in or not, is it would be awesome if we could see the beginnings of navigation and pathfinding, which is a really fun problem for the world that we've got. That's a you know, like, so first off, the world is huge. Secondly, the world is dynamic. Anyone can just say, like, okay, I'm putting a building here, or I am dropping a chunk of a building here. And so the combination of a huge world and a dynamic player-driven world, you know, it's, you know, this is masterclass. So we got a guy. He's doing some work on that. So I can't promise if it'll definitely be coming in just at the very end of it, if it came in at all. But yeah, that would be cool.
Yeah, I would like to see our scenario NPCs be a little bit smarter. Some of you have encountered the scenario NPCs, you might notice.
Come on, Ben.
You might notice that they're not very smart yet, especially as far as their navigation, and you know, they have some issues with ability selection and targeting as well. But having better AI, even though our game is not a heavily NPC-based game, it's not, you know, based on going out and doing quests and dungeons and things like that very much. There's still a lot of NPCs, and there's still a lot of need for NPCs, even though there aren't as many of them as you would see in a typical game.
I mean, you kill a wolf, you skin the wolf. You know, that's still an NPC,
right? And
you
so
know, it's a furry, self-propelled gathering node.
And so getting those in and working, I mean, that's going to be getting the animation work done that we need in order to support new skeletons and making meshes and having quadruped locomotion animation cycles and like all kinds of stuff in order to get that working. But I'll be happy just to have like the scenario NPCs and castle guards and stuff that are using our like typical humanoids and having those guys work. But having gathering NPCs and things like that out there in the world too, that'll help, I think, tremendously in getting the world more interesting and adding more content and things to go do and have fun with.
Antediluvian asks, hey Ben, what is the current design vision or plan for the panic mechanic? I.e., is it going to act as a scatter, or is it going to make your cast/activation times change?
So panic is really there to create a vulnerability circumstance that doesn't exist at the outset of an engagement. So you start out with no panic, basically, as you're running around in the world normally. Some areas may cause panic just inherently, but for the most part, as you're just standing around in the world, you don't have any. And then when you get into combat, some things will cause some amount of panic to your character, and it will decay over time a bit, but for the most part, it will go up over the course of a fight as more and more of these things happen. But then once you've got it maxed out, you start becoming vulnerable to a specific class of effects. And these effects can be way more powerful than anything that we would want to have happen at the beginning of a fight. So if you could initiate a fight with, something that's either super damaging or super heavily controlling or something, that would just win you the fight in the beginning. Of like, whoever gets this initiator off, if there's two factions and they're fighting each other and one side lands this thing, they would just win. And we don't want that to be the case, but we still want to be able to have this class of like, not superpowers, but like really strong effects. And so as you build up panic on the other faction, they can be aware of that. There are abilities that will reduce your panic so they can counteract it a bit. But once you reach this state of being at your maximum panic, then these things can happen. And so you have to make sure that you time them right. Certain players will reach their thresholds at different times, so it's not like everybody ubiquitously increases their panic rating at the same rate. And so causing panic vulnerability to people and then using those effects when you have that state achieved will be a part of combat that causes this sort of escalation to where it's not just super crazy things can happen right at the beginning. There's a specific time when they can happen, and it's later on in the fight when hopefully there's been some important things already having happened, that it's not just the one singular deciding factor.
That sounds cool. No, I mean, like there are things where I'm just like, Ben's just like, hey, I need this ability to script statuses, and I don't even ask what for. I just give it to him, and then I'm like, oh, that's what you wanted that for. That's really cool.
5-minute warning, folks. 5-minute warning. Bumble asks, will support classes be able to give buffs to all nearby players or only to their warband members?
In large part, only to their warband members. So when you're talking about speed and things like that, we don't just want, one support character to be like part of a very large blob of players and just run them all around at super speed, and then have, multiple support characters and have them all stacking their things all together. So a lot of their functionality is limited to the people that they're actually in a warband with. And so if you have multiple warbands, each one will need a separate support character. There's also some things that other archetypes will have that work like that as well, where it's specific to your warband and doesn't cross over to just everybody in the area. And that's to give specific synergies and advantages to well orchestrated and constructed groups. But there will be some things that are just everybody. But we have to be pretty careful with that so that we don't give huge advantages to just having large groups of people, because having a lot of people is already an advantage. So if you have a large group of people that can all benefit from effects, then you're stacking something and making a multiplier that makes large groups even more powerful. So that's one of the ways that we sort of curb that a little bit, is limiting a lot of the things that would typically be just area of effect to be area of effect to people who are in your warband only.
Hamblepants asks, what's the largest number of live human players that have been in a test together?
In one single zone, I think we hit 500. So I'm looking forward to, and that was like a fairly contained scenario. So it wasn't just like scattered all over. It was, there was meaningful interaction between all of them. Total logged into across all the servers and safe zones and everything else at the same time, I don't actually know. It horizontally scales well enough that we don't worry about that.
So on the other hand,
You're talking about live humans.
yeah, this
right?
is specific. Yeah, I want to say specifically, this is live humans, as in human people out on the internet sitting at a computer pushing buttons, not our bots, which
Right.
are as close to those as we can reasonably make them.
Yeah,
right?
it's just, it is a client with the graphics turned off.
Yeah.
And it really, really is like, just like the client, it controls itself by holding down a fake key.
Yeah.
So the server does not know, like when we do bot tests, like there's a big difference between bots and NPCs. The server does not know that the bot is not a client. We've gone up to thousands all in one zone on those. But then NPCs are, it's contained in a server and it's talking back, and it's just like got a direct path in there. It's not going through proxies. It's not doing prediction and lag compensation and all of that. So the load of NPCs is way lower than players.
And there's some other differences with the input and stuff that, metric-wise makes players different than
Players
bots. But bots are heavier.
Players will come up with combinations of things to do that.
The bots aren't very smart.
Yeah,
they
the
don't
bots
know
won't
how to
think to do that.
Yeah.
That would never occur to a bot to jump off that ledge right there. We absolutely need both. But the bots actually put more load on the server just because they fire more abilities more often.
Yeah, but the reason it's gone up to 500 isn't because it can't go higher. It's just that's how many people we had.
Showed up for that one scenario on that morning.
Yeah, and so our potential scalability. How many bots have we ever had?
3,000 in one zone.
Yeah. So if 3,000 of you wanted to try and play our game, you probably could.
In the same zone.
In-
like
in-
3,000
yeah,
3,000 all at once spread across
on
multiple
the screen
zones
in a
wouldn't
place
matter.
in a fight together.
Yeah.
Right. Well, it is just about 5 o'clock. You guys want to try to do one more question?
Okay.
Sure.
All right. The man with no screen name asks, what is the feature you really want to see implemented in testing that is currently on the back burner right now?
Reactive terrain morphs. Make terrain changes based on who's controlling the realm. That's been floating in the back burner for a really long time, and we've put it in several times and then taken it out because it was like, oh yeah, there's too much, it causes hitches when it swaps, and eventually we're going to, putting that on the front burner and optimizing it, just figuring out, okay, where are the places where like swapping the terrain causes hitches relative to the, main game loop spitting out a frame 60 times a second. That's just one of those things of this is going to be cool when it happens. So it's not that much work, but not a priority compared to getting core gameplay mechanics in, which is what we're focused on.
I think I would say the dynamic world map. For those of you who might not know the backstory of this, the world map of CU is a bunch of islands. But one of the things that is supposed to happen is as you go out and conquer islands and achieve full realm ownership of one of these spaces, that island actually moves and merges with the other islands, and so you have a sort of interesting puzzle of these pieces that are moving around and attaching and detaching from each other as control takes place. And that is such a thing that other games have never done to my knowledge that I really am interested in seeing that happen. I think that it'll create some interesting gameplay circumstances, but it'll also be just conceptually interesting, and being able to look at the map each time you log in and see what state it's in and which islands you're trying to capture, and then having them actually break off and merge back together in different ways as you capture different territories. I think that'll be really, really interesting, and I want to see that happen at some point when we get around to it. But again, it's such a isolated piece of like you could just do that as a completely separate feature. It doesn't have any like dependencies or anything from any of the other things we're doing. And the stuff we're doing right now is like trying to make a new ability editor and trying to get to a 64-bit client and things like that are so fundamental that things like that are not on the near-term to-do list.
All right. Well, that's it for today. Keep an eye out for our evening update email, which will have the top 10-ish that these guys just read, and a bunch of cool stuff, including the clip Andrew mentioned.
Yeah, and there'll be some gifs of I assume some screenshots of new art and everything else. So.
And another stream coming soon?
Yeah, I'm going to take a brief break, and then I'm going to go back to my desk and start figuring out what is the last bit of, So I've got, in Cube, I've got all the, like, chunks falling off buildings standalone in your client. I've got on the server, same thing working. And it's telling your client about them, but for some reason they're not drawing on the client. So this might be just like a stupid, simple, like, I forgot to uncomment this, but, so we might see that, like, it might be a thing I get done fairly quickly. But I really, really want to have building destruction networked. Destruction already happens, but chunky rubble physics networked.
Yeah.
And once that goes in, people can play with that over the weekend.
Yep.
All right. I guess we'll see you later.
Yep. Give me like 5 minutes, just mental health. All right.
All right, bye.
Bye.